The Bell P-59 was a program started by Bell Aviation in the 1940s and was the first American jet to go on the drawing board and to leave the production line. It ended up being developed over the course of a few years, leaving much to be desired performance and several teething issues. It was ultimately supplanted by the P-80 Shooting Star, under development at Lockheed. The XP-52 was a private venture taken on by Bell Aviation in 1939, which was intended to provide superior performance to contemporary fighters. It was in a pusher configuration with a contra-rotating propeller. By late 1940, this program was cancelled after an order of only 2 was placed. An attempt at revisiting this design came in the form of the XP-59, which was based on the XP-52. This design featured the Pratt & Whitney R2800-52 radial engine in the same pusher configuration as its predecessor. This, along with 4 other designs, was accepted for development by the end of 1940. Roughly a year later, in November 1941, this program had been canceled as the XP-59A project was underway. On 7th April 1941, Major General Hap Arnold visited Britain, allowing him to witness the taxi tests of the Gloucester G-40 jet, which was built to the specification E-2839, which featured Frank Whittle's W-1X turbojet engine prototype. He requested blueprints for the W-2B production model, which were provided on 2 October 1941 by RAF Major Donald J. Caron, along with the prototype W1X. This engine went through initial testing the following month. General Electric, based in New York, was selected to build the W2B engine, which became known as the GEIA on 4 September 1941. The following day, Bell Aviation was selected to take on the project of constructing the airframe to house this new engine. It had been generally agreed upon that this was due to the lighter workload of Bell and the firm's close proximity to the GE plant, as the former was based in Buffalo. By the end of the month, 3 prototypes were ordered by the USAAF from Bell. Worth noting, due to the state-of-the-art nature of this assignment, the aircraft and the engine had to be kept inconspicuous to outside observers. As a result, the Bell aircraft received the designation of XP-59A to make it appear as if it were a further development of the aforementioned XP-59 from 1940. The license-built W-2B at GE received the designation IA to make it appear as if it were another supercharger. It was expected that this first aircraft would be ready for delivery within 8 months of the order. Within 2 months, the engineers over at Bell Aviation submitted a design that was rather practical in contrast to the rather new concept of the turbojet engine. Of note, the aircraft featured a laminar flow wing, a high tailplane, and a pressurized cockpit. It was to be powered by 2 GEIA engines placed under the wing roots. The plan for the armament was initially to have 2 37mm cannons in the nose. Upon approval, construction of this design proceeded on 9 January 1942. The first of 3 XP-59A airframes was completed in August of 1942, with the engines being delivered by the end of the month. In September, the aircraft was disassembled, the wings and tail were removed, and was ferried by rail from Buffalo to Muroc Airfield in California for testing. In an effort to maintain secrecy here, a dummy prop was applied to the nose, and canvas was added to cover the engine, much like that which is depicted here. At this point in time, most people would have thought an aircraft without propellers to be quite odd, so they didn't want it to stand out. The engines were tested prior to conducting taxi and flight testing. Robert M. Stanley, who had arrived at Bell and was appointed director of flight testing, did most of this flying. By mid-November, Stanley had been called back to Bell and was replaced by Frank H. Kelly, Jr. as the director. By the end of January, the second prototype had arrived in Muroc and was flown by Kelly the following month. This was followed by the arrival and flight of the third prototype in April. On 26 March 1942, a contract was approved in which 13 YP-59A airframes were to be constructed by Bell. These would possess the serial numbers from 42-108-771 to 42-108-783, while those from 42-108-784 to 42-108-786 were retroactively applied to the XP-59A airframes. There were a few differences featured on the YP-59A versus its predecessor. It had the vertical stabilizer and wingtips squared off, while a ventral fin was added for increased stability. The pedostatic probe, which is used for measuring altitude and airspeed, was moved from the bottom of the left wing to the top of the tail. The main landing gear received uplocks so as to lock in the gear while in the up position. All of the YP-59As, aside from the last four, retained the armament of the XP-59A. Those airframes, however, had a revised armament of one 37mm cannon and three 50 caliber machine guns, which remained at the nose. These YP-59As were set to receive the improved GE I-16, later J-31 engine, but due to delays, the first six would use either the IA or I-14 engine. The first two YP-59As received the I-14B and arrived by rail on 4 June 1943. The second of these, 42-108-772, flew on 18th August 1943, while the first, 42-108-771, flew on the 15th of the following month. The third YP-59A, 42-108-773, was exchanged for the first Meteor 1 production aircraft and arrived in Britain on 9 September 1943. This aircraft was reconstructed in Britain and flew for the first time in that country on the 28th. In October, it received the serial number RJ362G, the G referring to the fact that it was constantly guarded. Early in November, it was transferred to the Royal Aircraft Establishment in Farnborough, where it was thoroughly tested against other British jets available at the time and is found to be inferior to those aircraft. This aircraft ended up being returned to the United States in 1945. The initial production proposal by Bell was on 9 July 1943, in which they planned to produce 300 P-59A and P-59B airframes. The Assistant Chief of Air Staff recommended cutting this number by 2/3. The production agreement was made in August of 1943 and was set to begin in February of the following year. Due to delays, it took until April for it to actually begin. Deliveries were supposed to happen through the course of March and October, but this was delayed notably due to engine production. By mid-October, the total order had been reduced from 100 airframes to only 50. The primary driver of this were the engine delays that required GE to focus on the I-40 engine being constructed for use in the Lockheed P-80. The P-59A was to retain the GE I-16, J-31 GE3, while the last few received a slightly improved J-31 GE5. This aircraft also retained the armament featured in the YP-59A. It also had provisions to carry 2 1,000-pound bombs or 8 60-pound rockets in ventral racks. Only the first 20 airframes, 44-22-609 to 44-22-628, were completed as P-59As. The remaining 30 were constructed as P-59Bs, 44-22-629 to 44-22-658. The main difference between the P-59A and P-59B was the addition of a 66-gallon fuel tank in each outer wing panel and the inclusion of leak-proof fuel cells. A contract was approved in March 1942 for 3 prototype single-engine P-59 airframes. The mock-up was found to be satisfactory in July, but ended up being cancelled in August 1943. Between November and December 1943, the NATC, Naval Air Test Center in Patuxent River, Maryland, received 2 YP-59As, 42-108-778 and 42-108-779. These aircraft received the bureau numbers 63960 and 63961 respectively. These particular aircraft were found to be unsatisfactory. 3 P-59Bs, 44-22-651, bureau number 64100, 44-22-656, bureau number 64108, and 44-22-657, bureau number 64109, were received between late 1945 and early 1946. These received heavy usage by the USN for flight testing and familiarization training for Navy pilots. Of note, on 8 December 1947, 44-22-656 was crashed and ended up being scrapped early the following year. A number of P-59 airframes were converted to have a second cockpit. This was done through the removal of the armament and placement of a cockpit setup in the nose. 2 XP-59As received this configuration and only incorporated an older-style windscreen for the passenger. 2 YP-59A airframes were also converted, except one of these added cockpits was for a drone pilot controlling other P-59 airframes. An incident occurred on 23 March 1945 in which the drone pilot in 42-108-783 or Mystic Mistress, was commandeering 42-108-780. The latter ended up being destroyed during the takeoff run. A P-59B 44-22-633, or Reluctant Robot, ended up taking its place as a drone. Of the 66 P-59 airframes that were produced, a total of 6 still remain today. P-59B 44-22-633, Reluctant Robot, can be counted as one such aircraft. This aircraft had been operated by the 445th Fighter Squadron, 412th Fighter Group, based in Morocco before its conversion as a drone. Upon being written off in 1948, it was mounted on a pole outside of Edwards Air Force Base. Although the P-59 proved to be below expectations and was quickly replaced by the Lockheed P-80 Shooting Star, it was an important step in the development of jet aircraft. It allowed not only for invaluable experience in development of the aircraft and the engine, but also allowed many pilots to fly jets, particularly in the Navy, while it was a jet conversion trainer.